Hello everybody, Disciple here with Overwatch Curios. So Gamescom is currently going on and Blizzard has actually been going pretty insane over there, revealing new content and doing all sorts of exciting things with the community. One of these things was an interview with Scott Mercer on Seagull's stream where he did a bit of a Q&A answering questions from Seagull and the community, which addressed a lot of the issues and concerns that we've been having with Overwatch, and we got some really cool light shed on a lot of things, and I want to focus this on the competitive aspect of what some of his answers were. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, then this will be a bit of a summary talking about what's going to be coming to Overwatch in the future and what Scott Mercer did reveal to us. So he did talk a bit about matchmaking, and I know that matchmaking has been an issue for a lot of you guys, especially when you stop by the stream and you talk about how you feel like matchmaking is keeping you down or how you feel like it's gotten so bad lately and it's nothing but trolls and throwers, and it looks like Blizzard actually is looking a bit into that. Now, some people, especially Valkia, have posed a role selection for matchmaking, saying that it would help keep trolls away since you won't have people who get the same hero, or who fight for roles, or who refuse to heal, or who won't tank, or any of that nonsense. However, it looks like Blizzard isn't exactly going to do role selection. Now, even though I really love the idea of role selection overall, and how I love how it works in a game like League of Legends, in a game like Overwatch where you really should be switching heroes and where you might need to flex and swap roles, it just doesn't make sense overall. And you might also end up with the issue that you have in World of Warcraft, where there's a huge lack of healers and tanks in the queues, and it means insanely long queue times for DPS players, and I would hate to see that happen in Overwatch. Even if you prefer to play DPS, sometimes you'll just swamp over to healer, and that's fine if it happens in a game. Now, what they did say is that they might actually be interested in doing some sort of behind the scenes change and some sort of invisible matchmaking to help and group people together with roles that would generally fit a good team comp. So if you have two Mercy mains, they might try and not put them on the same team, which I think would be awesome. And hey, maybe that means if I start maining Mercy, I won't have any Mercy mains on my team. But overall, it could potentially be really cool in allowing, you know, a couple tank and a couple support mains on every team so that you don't end up with 5 or 6 DPS. However, it could also potentially negatively affect matchmaking by increasing queue times or by giving you more lopsided matches, since it seems like it would be really hard to get two balanced teams with balanced team compositions based on who they main at any time of the day at pretty much any rating. I think that might be a little bit far off, but Scott Mercer said he might be interested in doing some invisible tweaks. They also addressed the issue of MMR resets, which I know a lot of you guys ask for. I see it in the comments and I see it in stream chat, and I've overall thought it's actually a pretty bad idea, and that's something that Scott Mercer actually confirmed. So if you guys remember, in Season 2, they did a bit of an MMR squish. In Season 1, you had this number out of 100. I was up at like 69, and when you finish the season, when you went into Season 2, they squished everyone's MMR in a little bit towards the middle so that you felt like you had a bit of a reset. If you were pretty high up, then you'd have a bit to climb up, but if you were pretty down below the curve, if you were under 50, then you wouldn't feel like you were starting from a negative place. And what it did was completely ruin competitive for a few days to even a few weeks, since you had so many players playing together of just wildly different skills. It turns out that your skill rating is actually generally pretty reflective of your skill, since if you deserve to be higher than a skill, you tend to climb higher than that. So if you put a bunch of people with a 40 skill rating versus people with a 60 skill rating, the people with the 60 skill rating are going to win more often than not. Now that's changed and we have different numbers, but it's basically like saying that people who are 3,000 and people who are 2,000 are actually at different skill levels, and if you reset them all to 2,500, you're gonna have some really, really bad games for quite some time. So they're not planning to do any sort of MMR reset, and I doubt we'd even see any sort of MMR squish towards the middle anytime soon. Now, the last thing he said about matchmaking was when he talked about off-hours skill rating farming, which if you guys don't know about, because it doesn't really affect a majority of the Overwatch player base, what some players will do is they'll queue up with a team at some really bizarre times, like 4 or 5 a.m. in the US, or just kind of competitive times when there aren't many players, and these are players who are up in Masters or even Grandmasters, and what happens is you get a long queue time, and then eventually it groups you against the next closest team that it can put you against, which usually happens to be much lower than you, potentially in Diamond or even down in Platinum. So you get these Plat players who are playing against Masters who are just farming them over and over, and even though they get just a little bit of skill rating for their wins, since they almost never lose those matches, they end up climbing skill rating overall, and they've been farming this. So apparently there's some change going through. I don't necessarily love the explanation of, ooh, there's some magic formula we're gonna do to fix it, but of course they also can't give us all the information, so right now I think we just gotta trust them and say that this is something they're looking into fixing. Now, in competitive mode itself, there are a few changes that we're not exactly going to get anytime soon. They apparently don't view solo queue as being any sort of priority or necessity at the moment, which I feel like I disagree with. I feel like there's a huge difference in the skill level of someone climbing solo versus someone climbing in a duo or even in a large group, and being able to separate and differentiate those could be really important to getting what feels like a stable solo player experience. One thing that I might kind of like are at least some sort of badges on your profile that show what kind of queue type you prefer. Flex queue in League of Legends has this, and even though no one plays Flex queue, the fact that we only have Flex queue in Overwatch means that it could be nice to at least see, hey, I climbed to this rating solo only, which could potentially mean more than someone who climbs this rating being carried by a group of 6. Now, Blizzard hasn't necessarily liked to do things like this in the past. They don't want to make one queue type feel better than another, but it's something that I would personally like to see myself. Now, they've also said that they might consider adding competitive deathmatch, and since they added competitive Lucio Ball, it looks like they are interested in adding these new, different, and interesting competitive game modes, which I really like. I think that deathmatch is very fresh and very fun and very interesting. The only thing that I worry about is that too many competitive game modes might end up in the kind of degradation of all of them, since if some people really only like playing competitive deathmatch, then those people are going to be potentially taken out of the competitive main queue, and that really results in overall worse matchmaking, since the more people you have in a matchmaking system, the more effective it can be, and the more accurate it can be as well. However, I'm definitely going to play competitive deathmatch myself. I think it's going to be hella fun. They also said that they don't want to add more competitive point rewards for winning competitive matches or even for playing them at all. They've said that golden weapons are actually an issue, and in the past, Jeff has said that he regrets adding them. However, I don't feel like anyone at this point really plays competitive for the rewards. They play towards the end of the season so they can get a nice lump of skill rating, but I've never gone into a game of Overwatch and started to lose it and thought, oh no, I'm gonna get less competitive points for this loss. I've always thought, oh no, I'm gonna lose skill rating for this. Maybe some other players are more affected by this than I am, but I feel like it's a little bit of a false flag that Blizzard has thrown up. They say that competitive points being awarded for this are more important than the skill rating and the overall base competitive nature of the players. However, we're not going to get anything added to this anytime soon, so unfortunately no really cool skins for competitive points in the future. Now, one thing that Blizzard has said that I love is that they don't like decay in its current state, because oh boy, can I agree. Sometimes I want to take a break from competitive. I want to play Lucio Ball, I want to play Quick Play, I want to play, God forbid, another game other than Overwatch. I've been playing Rust lately, I've been playing PUBG, I've been playing Hearthstone, so many other fun games that I decayed all the way down to 3,000 because I just discovered how fun not playing competitive could be. And it was very, very frustrating because I didn't feel like my skill decayed at all. However, my reflection of skill in the game decayed. So they said that they still want some form of decay, which I agree with, but they don't like how it forces people to play the game, and they'd rather have people play when they want. I feel like decay should exist so that you can't get to a high skill rating early on and then camp it until the very end. I think that your skill rating should be indicative of your skill at the moment, so you shouldn't sit on it for weeks or months. But if your skill rating is an indicator of your skill, then your skill itself isn't going to decay after not playing 7 games in a week, I'm sorry to tell you. So I'm very glad Blizzard is going to rework decay for the next season. Now, the final update on competitive play itself that Scott gave us is that map voting is not something Blizzard is considering at the moment, which is pretty interesting to me that it was even brought up. Now, of course, map voting is a part of professional and tournament play, but when it comes to competitive queue, I've always felt like competitive queue should be indicative of the game as a whole. And so having some maps excluded from that because players don't necessarily like them isn't necessarily going to help create that big inclusive experience. I feel like changing the bad maps to make them more likely to be played is always going to be the best solution. Now, of course, sometimes this sucks for players. Say Horizon Lunar Colony, when it was first released, there was actually a huge discrepancy between win rates on attack and defense. And so being able to exclude a map like that would actually be fantastic for players, but overall, I feel like it would just dramatically change the experience of playing Overwatch in ranked, since there are some maps you just might not see for months, and being able to include everything in there I think is the best way to give us a good game overall. So it's not something Blizzard's planning on doing at the moment, and it's probably not something we're going to see in the future unless we get so many maps and there's just such a discrepancy in between maps that the players outcry enough to finally give it to us. Anyway, that is it for the changes and updates to competitive mode specifically that Scott Mercer talked about on stream. I know that a lot of you guys care about competitive mode itself, and so I wanted to address those all together so you can see exactly how your ranked experience is going to be affected. There were a few other changes that he did mention and some updates that I do want to talk about. However, they don't necessarily fit in with competitive, so I'm going to make another video that should appeal more generally to people who play Overwatch, not necessarily competitive itself. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to see any of this happen live, you can always check out the stream at twitch.tv/disciple, where I play Overwatch and talk about the game all the time. And anyway, I will see you guys next time. Peace.